she didn't blink much.
People definitely noticed that first.
The wide blue eyes, the black turtleneck, the deep, deliberate voice. And she had a promise that sounded like the future itself. 1 drop of blood from a finger. And from that single drop, she said, you could run hundreds of medical tests. No needles, no vials, no waiting. A whole laboratory, she said, shrunk into a box you could put in your home. She called it the most important thing humanity had ever built. The world believed her completely. In 2015, Forbes named her the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet. Her net worth, printed in black ink, $4.5 billion. 18 months later, the same magazine revised that number. Not down, to 0, nothing.
What?
They said she was worth nothing at all. Here's the part most people never understand about that number. It didn't crash because the market turned. It crashed because it was never real to begin with. This is the autopsy of a $4.5 billion fortune that was built on a machine that did not work. And the money, like the machine, never actually existed. The story begins in 2003. Elizabeth Holmes is 19 years old, a chemical engineering student at Stanford. She has an idea and a fear. She said she was terrified of needles. The idea, what if you never needed the big needle, the vials, the lab at all? What if one painless prick of a finger could tell you everything? So she did the thing every legend in Silicon Valley is supposed to do. She dropped out, she took her tuition money, and she started a company. She named it Theranos. Therapy and diagnosis, fused into one word. The product was a machine she called the Edison, a sleek black box. Inside, she said, it could perform the work of an entire laboratory on a few drops of blood. And the story was perfect. A young woman in a male world, a college dropout like Jobs and Gates, a turtleneck like Jobs, a mission to save lives. The media didn't just cover it, they fell in love with it. And there was one moment that lit the fuse. In June 2014, Fortune magazine put her on the cover. That single article turned a quiet startup into a global phenomenon almost overnight. The press it generated was worth more than any product launch, because the press was the product. She gave the talks. She said things like, quote, "This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world." Even her voice became part of the legend. That deep, deliberate baritone. Former colleagues later said it wasn't entirely natural, that her ordinary speaking voice was higher, and the low register was part of the performance. She wasn't only building a company, she was building a character to sell it. The black turtleneck wasn't an accident either. She idolized Steve Jobs, studied him, dressed like him. Theranos reportedly recruited people who had worked at Apple. She was building a myth in his image, and the world rewarded her for it. And the believers were not naive. Look at who joined her board: Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, a former Secretary of State, General James Mattis, names with the weight of nations behind them. If they believed, who were you to doubt? The money followed the names. A deal with Walgreens put Theranos blood testing centers inside real pharmacies, where real patients would walk in and trust it with their health. Investors poured in roughly $700 million. The company's valuation soared to about $9 billion. Holmes owned roughly half of it, and that is where the $4.5 billion number on the magazine cover came from. There was just one question nobody powerful had actually forced her to answer. Did the machine work? Because behind the black box, the people who built it already knew the truth. Here is the first secret the autopsy reveals. Inside Theranos' own labs, the magic black box mostly wasn't being used. For most tests, it couldn't be trusted. According to later investigations and trial testimony, Theranos was secretly running many of its tests on ordinary commercial machines. The same big analyzers any hospital used. The ones made by other companies. The revolution was running on someone else's equipment, and to make a tiny finger prick drop fit those big machines, prosecutors said the blood had to be diluted, watered down, which can push results outside the range a machine is built to read accurately. This was not a demo. This was not a lab experiment. These were real patients in real Walgreens stores getting real results that could be wrong. Results about cancer, about pregnancy, about whether something inside them was killing them. Some patients were reportedly told they might be miscarrying when they weren't. Some got alarming readings that sent them to emergency rooms for conditions they didn't have. The machine that was supposed to save lives was handing out fear. Inside the company, 2 young employees couldn't live with it. One was named Erica Chung. The other was Tyler Schultz, the grandson of George Schultz, the statesman on the board. He saw the data, and he tried to warn his own grandfather. Imagine that table. A young man telling one of the most respected men in America that the company he'd staked his name on was a fraud. The grandfather reportedly didn't believe him. He believed her, and the company did not take the doubt quietly. Tyler Schultz later said Theranos' lawyers pressured and threatened him, that he was followed, and that defending himself cost his family hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. This is what it cost to tell the truth. The myth fought back hard, so the whistleblowers went to a journalist. In October 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreiro published the story that cracked the myth open. The machine didn't work the way Theranos claimed, and the company knew it. At first, she fought. She went on television. She called it the work of confused, disgruntled people trying to tear down something great. The familiar script: first they think you're crazy, then they fight you. But this time, the doubters had subpoena power. Federal health regulators inspected the actual labs. What they found was so serious, they said the testing posed immediate jeopardy to patient safety, and they moved to revoke the company's license. In 2016, regulators banned Elizabeth Holmes from owning or running a blood testing lab for 2 years. The founder of a blood testing company was now barred from blood testing. The crack had become a collapse. Now, watch what happens to the money, because this is the moment the myth becomes the math. In June 2016, Forbes did something it almost never does. It publicly revised Elizabeth Holmes' net worth from $4.5 billion to nothing. Zero. Here's why it could vanish so completely. Her fortune was never cash in a bank. It was the value of her shares, about half of a company supposedly worth $9 billion. But that $9 billion valuation was built on the belief that the machine worked. Take away the machine, and the company was worth a fraction of the story. Her slice of a worthless company is worth nothing. This is the engine of the entire channel, laid bare in one woman. The paper billionaire, a fortune that exists only as long as the story does. The instant the story dies, the money was never there at all. The fallout spread fast. Walgreens ended the partnership and later sued. Investors who had put in hundreds of millions watched it evaporate. The roughly $700 million raised, gone. In 2018, Theranos, the $9 billion revolution, the company with statesmen on its board, formally dissolved. It shut down. The black box went dark for good. But losing the money was not the end of it, because securities regulators and federal prosecutors had been reading the same documents we just walked through. And they had a different word for what happened. Not failure, fraud. The case widened to include Ramesh Balwani, known as Sonny, the company's president, and, it later emerged, Holmes' secret romantic partner for years. 2 people charged with deceiving investors and patients alike. The charges were not about a startup that simply failed. Startups fail every day, and that's legal. The charges were that they knowingly lied to investors about the technology and about the money it was making to keep the fortune alive. In 2021, after years of delay, Elizabeth Holmes walked into a federal courtroom in San Jose to stand trial. The youngest self-made female billionaire was now the defendant. The trial ran for months. Investors testified about the money they lost. Patients testified about the results that terrified them. And the defense argued something striking: that she truly believed in her own technology. That belief, not deceit, was driving her. That became the whole question. Was she a true believer whose dream failed? Or did she know the machine didn't work and sell it anyway? The jury heard the documents, the diluted samples, the borrowed machines, the numbers shown to investors. Among the most damaging, evidence that investors had been shown wildly optimistic revenue figures and documents implying endorsements from giant drug companies. Implications those companies said weren't true. On January 3, 2022, the verdict came. Guilty. Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of defrauding investors. Not patients in the end, the jury was split there, but investors. The money counts. She was found guilty of lying for the money. In November 2022, a judge sentenced her to more than 11 years in federal prison. 11 years and 3 months. Her partner, Sunny Balwani, was convicted separately and sentenced to nearly 13. The judge also ordered Holmes and Balwani to repay their victims roughly $452 million. A number that exists mostly on paper, because the woman once worth $4.5 billion, the court was told, had little left to give. In May 2023, Elizabeth Holmes, the woman on the magazine cover, the next Steve Jobs, the $4.5 billion founder, reported to a federal prison camp in Texas to begin serving her time. So, sit with the full ledger, the machine. It never did what she said. The fortune, $4.5 billion on paper, 0 in reality. The investors, hundreds of millions, gone. The patients, handed fear dressed up as science. This is the billion-dollar myth in its purest, sharpest form. Not a fortune that was stolen. A fortune that was never there. A number printed by a magazine, believed by a board of statesmen, and built entirely out of a story. Because that's the secret this whole channel keeps proving. We're told these fortunes measure something real, genius, value, a better world. Theranos is the proof that sometimes the only thing a billion-dollar valuation measures is how badly people wanted to believe. The blood test was never the product. The story was the product. And for a while, the story was worth $4.5 billion, until the morning everyone woke up and remembered to ask if it was true. If a fake machine could mint a $4 billion fortune, wait until you see the men who did it with nothing but a story and a stage. That one's next. Watch it now and subscribe, because every fortune we autopsy was once called genius.